And while we're on the subject, new rule: crazy people who still think the government brought down the Twin Towers in a controlled explosion have to stop pretending that I'm the one who's being naive. How big a lunatic do you have to be to watch two giant airliners packed with jet fuel slam into buildings on live TV, igniting a massive inferno that burned for 2 hours, and then think, well, if you believe that was the cause? Stop asking me to raise this ridiculous topic on the show and start asking your doctor if Paxil is right for you.
Welcome to the Autograph with me, Susan Madaris. We are coming to you from New York City, and my guest this week is Dr. Alan Sabrosky. He's joining me via satellite from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Join us. Alan Sabrosky is a writer and consultant specializing in national and international security affairs. In December 1988, he received the Superior Civilian Service Award after more than 5 years of service at the U.S. Army War College as Director of Studies, Strategic Studies Institute, and holder of the General of the Army Douglas MacArthur Chair of Research. A Marine Corps Vietnam veteran and a 1986 graduate of the U.S. Army War College, Dr. Sabrosky's teaching and research appointments have included the U.S. Military Academy and the Center for Strategic and International Studies. While in government service, he held concurrent adjunct professorships at Georgetown University and the Johns Hopkins University of Advanced International Studies. His published work includes 13 books or monographs and over 160 articles, chapters, and book reviews. He's currently completing a book-length study on the U.S. use of military force as an instrument of foreign policy titled Presidential War: The Politics of Military Intervention. Dr. Sabrosky is also an editor at Veterans Today, where his latest series of articles regarding Israeli involvement in the 9/11 attacks against the United States is a shocking expose of how the Israeli Mossad planned the attacks and how the U.S. military had prior knowledge. An argument often not discussed, especially by someone like Alan Sabrosky, who is an American with Jewish ancestry. However, Sabrosky bravely addresses this sensitive and controversial topic as someone devoted to the security of the United States at any cost. So what happens when a military insider puts the devastating terror attacks of 9/11 directly at Israel's doorstep? Dr. Alan Sabrosky, thank you so much for joining us on The Autograph.
My pleasure, Susan.
Tell us how you make the case for Israel's involvement in the tragic 9/11 attacks.
There were several different ways of doing it, Susan, and this may be a little bit more background than some of your people need, but I began to have suspicions about what had happened on 9/11 about 2 weeks after the attacks. There were several discontinuities that made no sense to me whatsoever. The behavior on the part of some of the named terrorists, these 19 Arabs on 4 planes, running around flying schools like loose cannon, not having the pilot skills to fly the aircraft, no recognition for what they had done afterwards in their own area, their own community. And it struck me that for many reasons, none of the arguments that were being given for what they did made any sense. But I then immediately forgot about it until about 2 years ago. And then I came across a video which I found to be extremely disturbing. That video was an interview with a Dutch demolitions expert named Danny Jowenko. And it concerned the collapse of the 3rd World Trade Center tower to go down on September 11th. This was the 47-story World Trade Center 7, the 3rd tallest building at the World Trade Center. Jowenko had never heard of it. Neither had I. And when you looked at the building, you saw that there was effectively no damage to any face of the building. It had not been hit by a plane. It had not been taken major trauma from debris, and it went straight down into its own footprint in about 7 seconds in what was visibly a controlled demolition. You know, and it was pretty clear that whatever those 19 named Arabs on 4 planes, 2 of them at the World Trade Center, had or had not done, they could not have had any possible effect on that 3rd building going down. Shortly after that, I came across, partly out of my own curiosity, which this definitely aroused, and a very extensive video, both of which I've cited, by the way, in some of my recent articles, which were taken on 9/11 itself from what became Ground Zero, the base of World Trade Center 1 and 2, the Twin Towers. involving police, emergency services personnel, newspaper and television correspondents, and you can see and hear secondary explosions at the base of the World Trade Center buildings. Now, planes impacting at 800 to 1,000 feet above the ground are not going to cause secondary explosions at the ground floor. And this followed over into other reports, also there on September 11th, about vans in the area, white vans. In one case, a van was picked up by police and people arrested at the access to a major bridge. The van was filled with explosives, and the two people in it were Israelis. In Bergen, New Jersey, same day, a van with several people in it had set up cameras. Before the first plane hit, they were filming the Twin Towers, and they were celebrating. High fives. It was a good thing for them. Residents called police. Police arrested them. All five were Israelis. What intrigued me, in addition to angering me, was that within days, all of these reports disappeared from the media. Most Americans don't know that a third building went down at the World Trade Center. Most have never heard about the secondary explosions reported by CNN, ABC, Fox, and others at the foundation of World Trade Center 1 and 2. None have ever heard about the vans. So I began looking at this very carefully, and one of the things that I began looking at was just what would it have taken for a special operations group of any particular nationality to have done 9/11, either by having taken control of the operation we have been told about, of the 19 named Arabs on 4 planes, or having run a parallel operation where you have 4 planes being hijacked, but there is another operation being done with those in concert. And I picked up 3 particular factors that would need to be taken into account. One was motivation, a second was expertise, and the third, the critical one, was access. Now, when it came to motivation, it's probably a very sad commentary on where we are in the world today, that there are an awful lot of countries and groups out there in the world that have either real or contrived reasons to hate America. It wasn't that way when I was a young man, but then many things weren't the same way now as they were when I was a young man. But almost all of the groups and countries that might want to do this only had a negative reason for doing it. They wanted to hurt us. The Israelis had a positive reason, and it's one that a number of their supporters had talked about from the 1990s on up, and what was called the Project for a New American Century, whose members included, by the way, later Vice President Richard Cheney, later Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, and many of the so-called neoconservatives, most of them Jewish, but not all, who came into the first Bush administration. Israel had a positive reason, and was get the United States involved in a war in the Middle East with a powerful, enraged, anti-Islamic strain within the American public, that they needed a catalytic event to produce this. They even talked about it in terms of another Pearl Harbor is needed to bring the American people into this fight. The second was expertise. Lots of expertise out there. Bringing buildings down and controlled demolitions is something that almost any intelligence agency of any country in the world can do or can contract. There are many private agencies that do this. But one thing is absolutely clear. Neither those 19 named Arabs on the plane nor Al-Qaeda as an organization had the expertise, the technical expertise to do that. And there is one very clear proof of that. If Al-Qaeda and its affiliates had had the ability to wire even one building for a controlled demolition at the World Trade Center, much less all three of them, the so-called green zone in the heart of Baghdad would have been a pile of rubble. And it wasn't. But the last is access. The World Trade Center security was an Israeli-owned company. Security at all three of the airports from which the 4 aircraft on 9/11 departed, ICTS, was an Israeli security company. That security company, by the way, also had security at the airports in Paris and Amsterdam later, from which the so-called shoe and underwear bombers departed. The security company at the World Trade Center had 24/7 state-of-the-art electronic surveillance and foot patrols. Wiring a building for a controlled demolition, and I must confess here, this is not my specialty. I have heard what people who do this for a living have said about it, but it is not my specialty. But the description of it in the video of Danny Jawenko that I mentioned to you is a very good one on this. And he described it in which if you needed to do it in a few hours, you would need 30 to 40 people, fewer if you had more time, cutting open the walls, literally cutting open the walls, all the way around the building, implanting the explosives, running detonator cord and cable, wires to put them to a control system, coordinating all of this activity. This is not something that involves the casual bringing in of a briefcase and leaving it at the foot of a building's elevator and going out again. This is extensive work, and it would require the type of extensive sustained access that could not go unremarked by the security forces in place on this. They also needed the ability to evade an apprehension and to have their escape concealed. And they had that done. All of the Israelis who were apprehended in those vans were later released in about 2 months at the direction of Michael Chertoff, then the second director of Homeland Security, a dual U.S.-Israeli national. There is no mention of them in the mainstream media, which is largely Zionist-owned. All of the major networks, all of the major national newspapers, all 3 of the weekly news magazines, all of the major political journals, most of the major publishing houses. It simply didn't happen. The only thing that happened on 9/11 that was discussed in the media, that have been accepted by the government, that was described in the 9/11 Commission, are 19 named Arabs on 4 planes bringing down 2 buildings. And the rest of it, in Orwellian terms, has become a non-event and a non-story.
We have all heard some absolutely incredible 9/11 conspiracy theories. The web, of course, is full of them. But tonight, we're bringing one out that feeds on racism out in the open. We were absolutely shocked by one recent poll that found out that 1 in every 3 Americans believe the terror attacks were not the work of America's enemies, but some sort of inside job. And Deborah Farrick found a smaller percentage who believe an even uglier theory.
This 9/11 attack was not by 19 Arabs. It was not by Muslims.
They talk about a Jewish plot.
Everywhere you look, you find a Zionist agent.
A conspiracy by Israeli intelligence.
في اللحظات نفسها.
Or by Zionist moles in the Bush administration, allegedly calling the shots in the Middle East. Websites, magazines, documentaries, radio programs, dozens of them disputing the facts that Al-Qaeda was behind the 9/11 attacks.
It was done by a group of Zionists.
Are you suggesting that Al-Qaeda had nothing to do with it, that this was all part of a large conspiracy, Zionist or otherwise?
Al-Qaeda is, in my opinion, has been exploited. I question whether such a group even exists.
Chicago writer Christopher Bolin is one of the conspiracy theorists.
I believe that there are Israeli elements that are connected to the Mossad that are involved in this attack.
There's no physical evidence to support claims that Jews were behind 9/11. But the speculation and rumors, mostly discounted here in the U.S., have gained momentum in Muslim countries, where they're discussed and believed. Deborah Lauder is with the Jewish-run Anti-Defamation League.
What's most troubling is when it reaches the internet and goes into the Muslim Arab world, we have this cross-fertilization of hate, and this is something we've never seen before.
A whole web of beliefs has grown to support this conspiracy theory. Listen to these Americans interviewed on Iranian television.
This is a big plot to take control of us, to start war.
One of the beliefs is that some 4,000 Israelis or Jews in the New York City area were warned by instant messages not to go to work on 9/11. For Wilton Sexer, a retired police sergeant who is Jewish, the claim is outrageous.
The remains consisted of a piece of bone, 2.5 inches long and about 1 inch wide, about the size of your index finger.
And that's all they ever found?
That's all they ever found.
Sexer's son Jason died in the towers. He says Jason received no warning. Neither did some 400 Jews who died in the tragedy.
Give me the names of the 4,000 Jews who stayed home. Show me something. There is nothing to show. This is a total, ridiculous, asinine rumor that was started by anti-Semites.
I think that conspiracy theories in general really do work a bit like a game of telephone. You know, they are told and retold and tend to get more and more far out in the telling.
When you imply that somehow Israelis were involved in the attack on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, people are going to look at you, critics will say, you are an anti-Semite. Are you?
No, I'm not an anti-Semite. This is the main charge that's leveled against me and has been for years, even before 9/11, because I am a critic of Zionist policies.
That's a very common technique among anti-Semites. They will twist things. I'm not an anti-Semite. I just believe X, Y, Z.
Anti-Semitic or not, the question now, will this 9/11 conspiracy theory become like the Kennedy assassination, analyzed for generations as an unsolved mystery? Deborah Fayrick, CNN, New York.
Time to check in with our out in the open panel. Sure they have plenty to say about this. Lauren, Michael DeRoy, welcome back. All right, so let's start with the resident Jew on our panel here. I mean, you hear this stuff, and it just makes you sick to your stomach. There is absolutely no evidence. There is absolutely no evidence. There is absolutely no evidence. No evidence. No evidence that anybody other than Al-Qaeda was involved with this attack. How upsetting is this to you?
The FBI has now put out a nationwide APB, all points bulletin, for a white Chevy van with New Jersey registration. Written on the back is Urban Moving Systems. Apparently there are 3 male occupants. Let's repeat that. The FBI has now put out an APB, an all points bulletin nationwide. They're looking for a white Chevy van with New Jersey registration, and written on the back of the white van are the words Urban Moving System. Apparently this van is carrying 3 male occupants. Obviously, if you see this van, you're asked to contact the FBI immediately.
Some very intelligent and aggressive cops also stopped another terrorist attack from happening on the George Washington Bridge. CBS 2 has learned exclusively that 2 men are in custody tonight after being arrested at the George Washington Bridge with an entire truckload of explosives. I know that there was police and Port Authority police on the scene.
2 suspects are in FBI custody after a truckload of explosives was discovered around the George Washington Bridge. That bridge links New York to New Jersey over the Hudson River. Whether the discovery of those explosives had anything to do with other events of the day is unclear, but the FBI has 2 suspects in hand, said the truck load of explosives, enough explosives were in the truck to do great damage to the George Washington Bridge.
I'm getting from 2 sources that there was a van either on the New Jersey Turnpike or the Garden State Parkway, and that it was near the George Washington Bridge. There were 2 or 3 men who were in the van. The van was pulled over. It is not clear why the van was pulled over, but when it was, law enforcers found tons of explosives inside of the van.
Central, clear the air for the message about the plane. All right, at this time, all citywide task force units to respond to Trinity and Liberty. All citywide task force units are to respond to Liberty and Trinity Place. 10-5, the message of the plane. Be advised, that's real hot zone, Central. And this is for all citywide task force units. Trinity Place and Liberty will be your mobilization point at this time. Trinity Place and Liberty. Fort CO, Central. Who is the authority of? 10-5, the message about the plane. Central, we need the bomb squad and ESU over King and...
One Sergeant.
Last message. All units.
Having no Jameson on the air.
9415, you on? Anybody advise the Penn Station's operator? Bobby. Negative. Give an update on the plane. Central, I got a message on that plane. It's a big truck with a mural painted of an airplane diving into New York City and exploding. I don't know what's in the truck. The truck is in between 6th and 7th on King Street. All right, 10-4, I'll send the issue in the bomb squad there for West Gate. The 4? Record that last message. All right, 10-5. With a mural painted, airplane diving into New York, blowing up. 2 men got out of the truck, ran away from it. We got those 2 under. Okay, good. Are you holding those 2 guys, Kay? We have them under. Let's get some units over here. Listen to that. Let's beat the shit out of them. All right, get in. All right, listen, you need any further on those 2 guys over there? You all right over there, Kay? We have both suspects under, Kay. We have the suspects who drove in the van exploded. We have both of them under, Kay. Let's get some help over here. Now, I'm sending you ESU there. I just want to make sure you and your guys are all right over there, Kay. That's all. What's the location of that, Kay? Put them up. You know, we have both Neotrans driven that exploded. Resurrect? What location? The location, Kay. You ready that? That's the chance for us to know. What's that location? King Street between 6th and 7th. Dean Street, 6th and 7th Avenue. Dean between 6th and 7th Avenue. Which unit is on the scene on King 6th and 7th? Which unit are you, Kay?
Captain Calamuso on the...
Central evacuate. What that? Explosion.
It has been more than 16 years since a civilian working for the Navy was charged with passing secrets to Israel. Jonathan Pollard pled guilty to conspiracy to commit espionage and is serving a life sentence. At first, Israeli leaders claimed Pollard was part of a rogue operation, but later took responsibility for his work. Now, Fox News has learned some U.S. investigators believe that there are Israelis again very much engaged in spying in and on the U.S., who may have known things they didn't tell us before September 11th. Fox News correspondent Carl Cameron has details in the first of a four-part series.
Since September 11th, more than 60 Israelis have been arrested or detained, either under the new Patriot anti-terrorism law or for immigration violations. A handful of active Israeli military were among those detained, according to investigators, who say some of the detainees also failed polygraph questions when asked about alleged surveillance activities against and in the United States. There is no indication that the Israelis were involved in the 9/11 attacks, but investigators suspect that the Israelis may have gathered intelligence about the attacks in advance and not shared it. A highly placed investigator said there are, quote, tie-ins, but when asked for details, he flatly refused to describe them, saying, quote, evidence linking these Israelis to 9/11 is classified. I cannot tell you about evidence that has been gathered. It's classified information. Fox News has learned that one group of Israelis, spotted in North Carolina recently, is suspected of keeping an apartment in California to spy on a group of Arabs who the United States is also investigating for links to terrorism. Numerous classified documents obtained by Fox News indicate that even prior to September 11th, as many as 140 other Israelis had been detained or arrested in a secretive and sprawling investigation into suspected espionage by Israelis in the United States. Investigators from numerous government agencies are part of a working group that's been compiling evidence since the mid-90s. These documents detail hundreds of incidents in cities and towns across the country that investigators say, quote, may well be an organized intelligence gathering activity. The first part of the investigation focuses on Israelis who say they are art students from the University of Jerusalem and Bezalel Academy. They repeatedly made contact with U.S. government personnel, the report says, by saying they wanted to sell cheap art or handiwork. Documents say they, quote, targeted and penetrated military bases, the DEA, FBI, and dozens of other government facilities, and even secret offices and unlisted private homes of law enforcement and intelligence personnel. The majority of those questioned, quote, stated they served in military intelligence, electronic surveillance intercept, and or explosive ordnance units. Another part of the investigation has resulted in the detention and arrests of dozens of Israelis at American Mall kiosks, where they've been selling toys called Puzzle Car and Zoomcopter. Investigators suspect a front. Shortly after the New York Times and Washington Post reported the Israeli detentions last month, the carts began vanishing. Zoomcopter's webpage says, "We are aware of the situation caused by thousands of mall carts being closed at the last minute. This in no way reflects the quality of the toy or its saleability. The problem lies in the operator's business policies." Why would Israelis spy in and on the U.S.? A General Accounting Office investigation referred to Israel as Country A and said, quote, "According to a U.S. intelligence agency, the government of Country A conducts the most aggressive espionage operation against the U.S. of any U.S. ally." A defense intelligence report said Israel has a voracious appetite for information and, quote, "The Israelis are motivated by strong survival instincts which dictate every facet of their political and economic policies. It aggressively collects military and industrial technology, and the U.S. is a high priority target." The document concludes, quote, "Israel possesses the resources and technical capability to achieve its collection objectives." A spokesman for the Israeli embassy here in Washington issued a categorical denial, saying any suggestion that Israelis are spying in or on the U.S. is, quote, "simply not true." There are other things to consider, and in the days ahead we will take a look at the U.S. phone system and law enforcement's methods for wiretaps, and an investigation into the possibility that both have been compromised by our friends and allies overseas. Brett?
Carl, what about this question of advanced knowledge of what was going to happen on 9/11? How clear are investigators that some Israeli agents may have known something?
Well, it's very explosive information, obviously, and there's a great deal of evidence that they say they have collected, none of it necessarily conclusive. It's more when they put it all together. A bigger question, they say, is how could they not have known? Almost a direct quote, Brett. A bigger question, they say, is how could they not have known? How could they not have known? How could they not have known?
Urban moving systems was discovered in a white van that had checked positive for carrying explosives. And they were caught videotaping the collapse from their van in Liberty Park. And, it just seems like they must have had prior knowledge, if not involvement.
They could have had prior knowledge.
And it's easy to put a truck bomb, as we did, as happened in London, and happens in Iraq or Israel on a weekly basis.
It's easy to put a truck bomb, as we did, as happened in London.
I grabbed my binoculars and I could see the towers from my window. And this is where I'm looking. And all of a sudden, down there, I see this van park. And I see 3 guys on top of the van. And I could see that they were like happy. They didn't look shocked to me. They didn't look shocked. I thought it was very strange.
Amazingly enough, we have found the moving company where the 5 Israelis worked.
Was this building being used as a front for some kind of Israeli intelligence operation that possibly was doing surveillance on the Arab American community? Were there men celebrating or slapping 5s or whatever?
We had received an all-points bulletin, and I just happened to see the van and, hollered over to my lieutenant, I think that could be the van. We checked it out, and it was. We were all on edge, obviously, so I really wasn't looking to make friends with these people, and neither were the officers that I were with. Once we started talking to them, they were pretty much like, hey, we're not against you, we're with you.
And at that point, we were taken for another round of questioning, this time related to our allegedly being members of Mossad. The fact of the matter is, we are coming from a country that experiences terror daily. Our purpose was to document the event.
The 5 Israelis were detained for 10 weeks and finally deported on immigration violations after the FBI cleared them of any involvement in 9/11.
Over 2 months of interrogation began. The FBI discovered the men weren't from Al-Qaeda. They were Israelis. An enduring conspiracy theory began, that they were Israeli field agents who'd uncovered the 9/11 plot in advance. Israel had deliberately failed to warn the US authorities because it wanted to ensure that American public opinion was hostile to the Arab world. Channel 4 traveled to Israel and spoke to 3 of the 5 men arrested that day to hear their side of the story.
One of the neighbors gave a call to the feds and tell there is a white van with 5 Arab people. As you see, I'm blonde, blue eyes. And he tells there is a bomb in a white van. He gave the number, 5 Arab people, and they're on the way to Manhattan to make a suicide.
I was the driver. The policeman took his gun and put it in my head.
Where are the bombs? Where did you want to do the suicide? I don't know nothing about what to say.
But I told them that I'm just a tourist from Israel, I'm Jewish. And he told me, don't talk, if you talk I'm going to shoot you.
People were spitting on us from the street. They are passing with their cars and spit on us. Because they thought that we are the Arabs. They were looking for someone to blame.
A passerby took these photos of the police searching the van. 5 men were inside it. Some had dual nationalities and were carrying more than 1 passport. Others had flight tickets to leave the US within days. Fearing robbery, one had over $4,000 hidden in a sock.
They were ripping things, they took the camera, they were screaming at us all that time. Put your head into the ground or we were gonna shoot you.
They told interrogators they were working for Urban Moving, a shipping and storage firm run by an Israeli businessman who often employed Israeli students without work permits. The men say there was an innocent explanation for what was found in the van and their behavior on 9/11. They were, they say, simply on a working holiday.
We heard in the news that one of the planes was crashing down the building, and we thought it was an accident at the beginning. So we went up to the roof of the moving, and we saw the building burning.
There is a better view from a building in Jersey that is up a hill, straight line to the World Trade Center. We decided to go up there. It's like 2-3 minutes from the office. Stand over there and take some pictures. Everyone wants pictures like this in his camera.
Their boss at Urban Moving, Dominic Suter, was questioned by the FBI, but then disappeared back to Israel. It left lots of unanswered questions and fueled suspicion about the 5 men. Investigators seized the firm's computers, and the investigation took on a new urgency with multiple lie detector tests.
They continued to ask, did you know the terrorists? Did you know where they flew from? Did you know what they were supposed to do? And the answer all the time is no, I don't know even what you talk about.
The FBI wasn't satisfied. Channel 4 has learned from intelligence sources that some of the men's names were already known to American counterintelligence. Paul Kurtzberg admitted serving in an Israeli army anti-terrorist unit. He refused to take a lie detector test for 10 weeks.
I was serving in a special unit in the army, and it's not a big secret or something like that. But there are things that I have to keep to myself as loyal to my country.
The story that the feds build is a very good story. When you hear their story, you start even to believe it inside. Okay, maybe I'm a spy. I'm sure that I'm not, but the story is so good, so maybe I am.
Juval Aviv is a counter-terrorism advisor to the US Congress, but was once a spy for Israel's secret service Mossad. He says Urban Moving was a front company for Israeli intelligence, and that some of its workers were spying illegally in the US.
Israel has engaged in intelligence gathering in friendly countries. Some of it is done with permission,
and some of it probably has been done without permission in areas that is vital to Israeli interest, where large Arab communities operate and live, where there's a lot of fundraising for terrorist activities in the Middle East. That's the old undercover. This is the old way of gathering intelligence, which America has not used. If a decision is being made to put a bomb under a building during and after prayer on a Friday night in a mosque, you have to be in the mosque. You will not be able to do it from a satellite.
Sources close to Israeli intelligence have told Channel 4 that urban moving produced no information that could have prevented 9/11. But whatever the truth of the conspiracy story, it's flushed out the possibility that Israel spies on America, its closest ally, an espionage tactic that both governments would prefer kept secret.
There's certain type of information and methods of collections that you don't want to share with the local host country. Systems that you use, contacts that you make, undercover operations that you penetrating other terrorist networks. Those types of information you don't share with anybody.
The urban moving 5 were eventually deported to Israel for visa violations. Channel 4 understands, from sources close to US intelligence, that the condition of their release was that Israel promised not to spy in the US without permission.
By now, I think it should be abundantly clear that Urban Moving Systems was in fact a Mossad front company. It was run by a known Mossad operative named Dominic Suter, who fled back to Israel after initial questioning from FBI investigators. In June of 2001, months before the terrorist attacks, Urban Moving Systems was given over a $498,000 business loan, which would never be paid back. You're probably thinking to yourself at this point, this is pretty damning information. Why was there no investigation, and what became of all the Israelis that were detained before, during, and after 9/11? The reason there was no investigation has to do with Israel First Zionist and key political positions. Representative Jane Harman was the chairwoman of the Homeland Security Subcommittee on Terrorism, and she was instrumental in seeing that there was no investigation into Urban Moving Systems. Michael Chertoff at the time was Assistant Attorney General, and as head of the criminal division of the Justice Department, he made sure all the detained Israelis were released back to Israel on minor visa violations. He would later go on to be the second head of the Department of Homeland Security.
First call up for Michael Chertoff, St. Petersburg, Florida. William, Independent Line. Hi.
Hello, good morning, gentlemen.
Morning.
You mentioned the September 10th, 2001 mindset. That made me nervous, so I think it should be September 9th. I was wondering if the missing $2 trillion plus that Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld reported on September 10th, 2001.
According to some estimates, we cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
$2.3 trillion with a T.
You know where those trillions went. Did you all ever find it?
I have to say I must have missed that news report about the missing trillions. I do know that in the run-up to September 11th, the 9/11 Commission looked back at what had been done and what hadn't been done, and I think they found the key problem was collecting information and fusing information so that we could get the best possible picture of the threat we faced. You know, in the Cold War, we were...
And now Mark in Gwen, Michigan. You got your volume down, I know, and you can go ahead with your question for Secretary Chertoff.
Yes, hello, Mr. Chertoff.
Hello, Mark.
I wanted to let you know that I called the Department of Homeland Security and was trying to give them information. They connected me with the FBI, and as soon as I mentioned the wealthy elite, they cut me off. I called back the Department of Homeland Security and asked them, I'm trying to get the Department of Homeland Security some very important information. They connected me back to the FBI.
Mark, what is that important information? What is that important information?
That important information is called the wealthy elite. We have overwhelming evidence to prove that these people have taken control of the United States federal government. They are the ones that attacked us on 9/11.
So, Mr. Chertoff, if that man has information he wants to share, where would you recommend he send
Well, I think they did the right thing. They sent him to the FBI. If someone wants to allege a crime or a threat, usually the FBI is the first respondent, and they have to evaluate whether they think there's any actual evidence to proceed. But normally the FBI is very responsive if there's a serious, credible piece of information.
What's your general viewpoint about people who think the federal government was involved in 9/11?
I think that that's in the same category as Holocaust denial and those people who still aren't convinced that President Obama was born in Hawaii. It's kind of a out there conspiracy theory which does not warrant a lot of attention.
Mandy in New Orleans, you're on with Michael Chertoff. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Would you please allow me a follow-up, because I know predictably what this man will answer to my questions. Mr. Chertoff, please do not feign ignorance on this, because if I can find this out, certainly you know it. Recently, 6 of the 10 9/11 commissioners have stated publicly that the 9/11 Commission was hogwashed, that it was set up to fail and it was a whitewash. Recently, Bethlehem Publications, 9 scientists that were given debris from the World Trade Centers have found evidence of nanothermite, a high-grade military explosive.
Okay, Mandy, thank you. We're going to leave it there because we know where you're going. Mr. Chertoff, you've addressed that question.
Yeah, I mean, again, this crops up from time to time, and it has been looked at thoroughly by everybody. Frankly, you have people who witnessed the planes going into the buildings. I mean, it's I have to say, it's like Holocaust denial and the people who believe the president was not born in Hawaii. It's just a myth.
I've never seen a difference between going and buying a newspaper than it is from buying an ice cream or something. It's a product, and they are individual corporations, and as far as I know anyway, well, in Sweden it would be somewhat different, but if we look at it from the point of view of American media, international in that way, they, as far as I know, they don't hold any responsibility. They don't have to do what they supposedly say that they're going to do, as far as I know.
No.
So it's up to
if
people.
you have a choice between ice cream and People Magazine, go for the ice cream because yeah. People Magazine or Us Weekly or even the New York Times, the sophistication now of the neurolinguistic programming, even on Hannity and these TV shows that are supposedly alternative, the sophistication of the neurolinguistic programming involved in that is people are not aware of that either. It's actually safer to go get ice cream than it is to watch these programs because you're being affected on a subliminal level that you don't even know. You are that unaware of how deeply affected you are by it. And all you have to do is shut your TV off for a month and monitor how you feel. And that alone is proof enough. When you look at these magazines that have these images in them, it steals your energy. People think, oh, it's harmless. It's not. You are being affected on a deep level that you're not even aware of. But these folks that produce this stuff, they're quite aware of it. What is mind control? Mind control is repetition. It's like when I tell my kids, brush your teeth, brush your teeth, brush your teeth, brush your teeth. That's mind control. Yep. That's me trying to get them to do something by saying it over and over and over and over and over again. That's what mind control is.
American news coverage is influenced by a complex set of institutional relationships. These influences can be thought of as a series of filters through which the news must travel before it emerges in the voices of news anchors. To understand how American news media report on the Middle East conflict, we need to understand how these institutional filters operate. Among the most important of these filters are the business interests of the corporations that own the mass media, interests that extend beyond the United States and across the globe to the Middle East. The economic interests of media owners are shared by political elites, politicians and policymakers who form a second filter. These political elites have the power to access and influence mainstream media and are themselves part of a system dominated by corporate money and interests. The strategic importance of the Middle East to these two groups is reflected in media coverage of the region and of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. A third filter, Israel's own public relations efforts, further affects the coverage. The government of Israel employs some of the largest American public relations firms as image consultants to coordinate its political and media campaigns. 9 Israeli consulates help implement these PR campaigns by developing relationships with journalists and monitoring media outlets. Scores of private American organizations, both Christian and Jewish, reiterate the official line and organize grassroots opposition to any coverage deemed unfavorable to Israel. The most important of these is AIPAC, the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee, widely regarded as the most powerful foreign lobby in Washington. This institutional framework of American business and political interests in combination with Israeli public relations shapes media coverage of the Middle East. At the same time, those progressive organizations opposing Israeli government policy, such as Jews Against the Occupation and Americans for Peace Now, rarely make it through these filters. Finally, if any news stories critical of Israeli policy do surface, there are a host of media watchdog groups that monitor and pressure journalists and media outlets, the most important of which is Camera.
Atmosphere. The V sign for victory being displayed in East Jerusalem today among jubilant Palestinians that the United States had been subject to this attack. What are we to make of that, Jennifer? Are we to, Yasser Arafat may issue this condemnation. Look at this. We're seeing people applauding, clapping, smiling, happy to know that thousands of Americans have died in this sneak attack. And there you see a V for victory sign held up to the camera. What are we to make of that, and what are we to make of what about what Yasser Arafat said today?
We are completely shocked, unbelievable.
Right, that's the view from the Palestinian side. Joining me now here in the BBC World studio is the former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, who's in London at the moment. Mr. Barak, welcome to BBC World. First, your reaction, having heard what's happened. At least 4 planes have been hijacked, and there may be more.
The world will not be the same from today on. It's an attack against our whole civilization. I don't know who is responsible. I believe we will know in 12 hours. If it is a kind of bin Laden organization, and even if it's something else, I believe that this is the time to deploy a globally concerted effort led by the United States, the UK, Europe, and Russia against all sources of terror. The same kind of struggle that our forefathers launched against the piracy on the high seas.
In your position as Prime Minister, Defence Minister, also formerly in the Army, were you ever aware of any incident planned like this?
Not in the dimensions, but different elements where there clearly there was an attempt on the Twin Towers. A few years ago, there was an attempt to explode the Holland tunnel leading into Manhattan. But of this size and a simultaneous attack, I don't think that anyone had predicted it in advance.
Is it something that security services, intelligence services could ever have got wind of?
I'm not sure, but this is not the case. It really happened in front of our eyes, and the question is what should be done in regard to it in order to avoid it in the future. It's going to be a tough struggle. There will be many tough and painful moments along the way, but I believe that if we will coordinate diplomatic, operational, intelligence, and economic activities that will not let them land at any airport, and will isolate automatically any nation that is ready to host terror or support them. By doing this consistently along 6 or 10 years, we will reduce dramatically this challenge to all our way of life.
Your words, Mr. Barak, are very similar to the words used to justify missile defense in the United States, which may have taken another 10 or 15 years. Here we've seen low-tech hijacked by those with evil intent.
Yeah, I believe that it's, first of all, missile defense is also something which is clearly needed as long as there are rogue states, and it should be done, and it should be deployed maybe not on national level, but only on trans-regional level to cover exactly the threat from rogue states like Iran, Iraq, or Libya. But in this area, we will suffer. It will not be so easy to go aboard an airplane in the near future, but we have no way but to stand firm facing terror. Otherwise, all our way of life will be threatened. And to stand firm means to isolate from the world every nation that is hosting them and calling every terror thug with the accurate name and be ready with all the pains that come with it to act upon our observations.
What price might democracy have to pay, given what has happened in the last 3 hours in the United States, given what you're experiencing now in Israel, in the center of Jerusalem, from your own citizens now, with the bombing over the weekend?
There is no shortcuts. You know, our civilization is already highly vulnerable. Look at the entrances into the gates of boarding airplanes. It's a situation where it's not easy. Every simple step, crossing borders or going on a plane or on a ship, will become more complicated. But at the same time, it's a time to identify. There are no more than 5 or 6 countries in the world which are directly or indirectly responsible for hosting terror. There are no more than 10 or 15 terror thugs in the world. All the organizations are well known. The MI6 know all the information, the CIA knows, the Mossad knows it, and the same, the Zahn Bureau, the band. And it's time for action. Facing such an attack, we cannot but act. And these terror thugs and rogue leaders are highly skillful in identifying the slightest cracks in the will of power or power of will of the leaders of the free world.
But let me press this point about democracy and the price democracy may have to pay, because you know very well that many passengers in the United States have long expected to be able to walk into an airport, get on a domestic aircraft unhindered within about 10 minutes of the plane taking off. Yeah. They expect that as a free country.
And it's a part of the problem that we have in a world which is so turbulent that we won't be able to isolate our advanced way of life from what happens around. And it's a time to launch a operational, concrete war against terror, even if it takes certain pains from the routine activities of our normal society.
Now, Mr. Barak, you have deep problems, great attention in the Middle East at the moment, but you've used there a war against this kind of terrorism. What can be done? Because the great thing that is talked about by people like you, diplomats, politicians, world leaders, is preventing conflict before it happens. When you talk about a war, how do you take a war or a challenge or a struggle to those who are determined, through 3 or 4 people only today, to hijack 4 planes at least, as we know, hit the Pentagon, hit the World Trade Center, try and hit, we believe, somewhere else? How do you take a war to 4 people?
I spent decades struggling terror, almost, with my 10 fingers, together with a lot of colleagues all around the world. I believe that the world intelligence community, in a concerted effort, can identify within few months the sources of this terror. They can identify the places where they are deployed on Earth. Every such a place is within certain country. Bin Laden sits in Afghanistan. There is a source of terror.
Who else do you identify, though? Because we're not saying he's responsible for this necessarily.
No, we don't say that he's necessarily responsible. Bin Laden sits in Afghanistan. There is a source of
who else
terror.
Did you identify, though? Because we're not saying he's responsible for this necessarily.
No, we don't say that he's necessarily responsible. We know where other terror thugs are living. We know that Ferganskaya Dolina in Central Asia is a major route for drugs, but at the same time major route for terror. And I know that President Putin is highly committed to the struggle against terror, and I feel that he should be part of this international effort. I believe that the MI6 is highly capable. You have proven it along decades. Your own skills in standing firm politically and acting pointedly, operationally against terror. And we should cooperate with
preemptively?
Both preemptive and by diplomatic means, namely rogue states. There are 5 of them: Iran, Iraq, Libya, North Korea. These kind of states should be treated as rogue states. And the same applies to even to leaders like Arafat. We heard him just recently condemning this. I praise him for this condemnation, but he personally is responsible for many terror events that happened in the last few years. Same happened in some other capitals in the Middle East.
Ehud Barak, former Prime Minister of Israel, here in BBC World. Thank you for joining us here in our studio in London.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who used to work for me, and one of the generals called me and he said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They've just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran." The truth is about the Middle East is, had there been no oil there, it would be like Africa. Nobody is threatening to intervene in Africa. The problem is the opposite. We keep asking for people to intervene and stop it. And there's no question that the presence of petroleum throughout the region has sparked great power involvement. Whether that was the specific motivation for the coup or not, I can't tell you, but there's always been this attitude that somehow we could intervene and use force in the region.
I am reminded of a couple of things that happened recently, Dr. Gross. Not long ago, just within the last couple of weeks, in fact, there was a pilot who flew. There was another one. We just saw another one. We just saw another one apparently go. Another plane just flew into the second tower. This has to be deliberate, folks.
Well, that would begin to say that, yeah.
We just saw on live television as a second plane flew into the second tower of the World Trade Center. Now, given what has been going on around the world, some of the key suspects come to mind: Osama bin Laden. Who knows what?
Oded Yinon. Oded Yinon is the Israeli scholar who put forth the paper, A Strategy for Israel in the 1980s. And in that paper, it's a plan that's outlined to basically divide up the Arab world, and Iran too, I believe, into smaller states with the idea that smaller states are weaker states and therefore easier to dominate and control. The goal is divide and conquer. If people are pitted against each other and fighting each other, then they are basically, their attention is diverted, and it's easier for the empire power to take the resources and subjugate the people, and then you have colonialism.
Oded Yinon put forth such ideas that Israel should use its military power to destabilize and fragment Israel's enemies. This was put forth, as I said, in 1982 during the Begin administration, when, of course, Begin did invade Lebanon, and perhaps that was, though it failed, some historians have contended there was a broader plan intended there to affect more of the Middle East to advance Israeli security. I might say that the late Israel Shahak translated Yinon's study and into English, and the name of the translation was The Zionist Plan for the Middle East. Now, after 1996, the neoconservatives started to emphasize that the threat wasn't simply to Israel, but it was a threat to the United States, that there was a terrorist threat from the Islamic and Arab countries and groups in the Middle East, that the United States had to do something about it. The fundamental threat they emphasized came from Saddam Hussein in Iraq. Just want to point out that in both Yinon and Study and A Clean Break, there was an emphasis on attacking Iraq first, that Iraq was a key, let's say, a geostrategic location for Israel to destabilize all of its enemies in the Middle East.
So in this paper, there's basically, it was a right-wing proposal, but nevertheless, you see it coming to pass today with the proposal to divide Iraq into three parts, which is not what Iraqis want. Iraqis, the majority of Iraqis want the occupation to end. They want the restoration of Iraq.
Eastern Libya was where the Libyan Revolution began. The first protests on February 17th occurred here. The NTC was formed here, and it was the mission to protect Eastern Libyan civilians from Gaddafi's forces that gave the UN and NATO their justification for military intervention. This also happens to be where the majority of Libya's oil production takes place. Libya was divided into 3 provinces in the post-independence era, with the eastern province, known as Cyrenaica, hosting the country's economic capital in Benghazi. There remains a lot of nostalgia in the east that makes a return to that early system seem appealing. Certainly there are enough resources in eastern Libya for it to exist as a viable autonomous province.
أن نقول فقط في سوريا هذه المرة نقول فقط في دير الزور عجز العالم عجز تركيا عجز المسلمون عجز العرب عن تحقيق منطقة عازلة لإيواء السوريين فتم بحمد الله على يد المجاهدين من أبناء المنطقة كتائب لواء جعفر الطيار بتشكيل منطقة عازلة خاصة بهم.
Well, I think if you really want to know the truth about the invasion of Iraq, there's clearly some incentives for the invasion. Securing oil was one of them. Establishing permanent military bases in the region was another one. But a far less talked about reality is Israeli plans, which made clear that the balkanization of surrounding countries, in particular Iraq, if we go to Oded Yinon's plan for Israel in the 1980s, it lays out very clearly a strategy of destabilizing all of the surrounding areas of Israel. This includes Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, and even Egypt and Saudi Arabia. And this long-term goal is part of the Greater Israel Project. So in terms of the sectarian divide you see happening in in Iraq today, it's actually all part of a very well-designed plan to try and secure the goal, this fantasy goal of the Greater Israel Project.
Okay, but why would Israel benefit from an unstable Middle East, an unstable Arab nations? Because what we see that this instability actually is followed by fundamental Islam, and people who are overthrown are either replaced by fundamentalist powers, or there's just more sectarian violence that grows.
Yes, and it would seem on the surface from a sane point of view that everything is going wrong. But in fact, when you fracture a country along sectarian divide, ultimately you weaken the country. What the last thing that Israel or the United States wants is a strong Nasser-type leader, an Arab nationalist who will seriously ensure that the resources of that country are taken and protected and used for the benefit of the people. That's the last thing that the empire wants and that Israel wants. So while you have these religious fundamentalist nutcases who are running around bombing and doing all sorts of stuff like that, you have a weakened, fractured country in Iraq, and that is the prerequisite for ultimately expanding Israel into the fantasy of the Greater Israel Project. It doesn't seem sane, and it's not sane, because those who are trying to carry out these agendas are pure and simple psychopaths.
I frankly think that crisis initiation is really tough. And it's very hard for me to see how the United States president can get us to war with Iran. Which leads me to conclude that if, in fact, compromise is not coming, that the traditional way of America gets to war is what would be best for U.S. interests. Some people might think that Mr. Roosevelt wanted to get us into World War II, as David mentioned. You may recall we had to wait for Pearl Harbor. Some people might think Mr. Wilson wanted to get us into World War I. You may recall he had to wait for the Lusitania episode. Some people might think that Mr. Johnson wanted to send troops to Vietnam. You may recall we had to wait for the Gulf of Tonkin episode. We didn't go to war with Spain until the until the Maine exploded. And may I point out that Mr. Lincoln did not feel he could call out the Federal Army until Fort Sumter was attacked, which is why he ordered the commander at Fort Sumter to do exactly that thing which the South Carolinians had said would cause an attack. So if, in fact, the Iranians aren't going to compromise, it would be best if somebody else started the war. But I would just like to suggest that one can combine other means of pressure with sanctions. I mentioned that explosion on August 17th. We could step up the pressure. I mean, look, people, Iranian submarines periodically go down. Someday one of them might not come up. Who would know why? We can do a variety of things if we wish to increase the pressure. I'm not advocating that, but I'm just suggesting that this is not a either-or proposition. Of, you know, it's just sanctions has to succeed or other things. We are in the game of using covert means against the Iranians. We could get nastier at that.
The Israeli newspaper Ma'ariv has reported Israel's former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has publicly said the September 11th attacks have been good for Israel. Netanyahu said, quote, "We're benefiting from one thing, and that is the attack on the Twin Towers and Pentagon and the American struggle in Iraq." End quote. Netanyahu then reportedly said these events, quote, "swung American public opinion in our favor." Sorry, everyone, just a little cold. Hope you'll bear with me. In news from Africa, Nigeria.
שהמחיר יהיה כבד מצוא, כרגע המחיר לא כבד מצוא. התקפה רבת היקף ברשות הפלסטינית. להביא אותם לפחד שהכל מתמוטט.
ואז, רגע, אבל אז שוב העולם יגיד מה, אתם כובשים? אתה לא מפחד מהעולם, ביבי.
במיוחד היום עם אמריקה, אני יודע מה זה אמריקה. אמריקה זה דבר שאפשר להזיז אותו בקלות, להזיז לכיוון הנכון.
הם אומרים שהם בעדינו, אבל כאילו...
לא יחמיאו לו.
אז שאם אנחנו עושים איזה משהו, אז הם...
יש שם נניח שהם אומרים משהו. אז אמרו, 80% מהאמריקאים תומכים בה. זה אבסורד, יש לנו שם תמיכה כזאת, ואנחנו אומרים מה נעשה עם ה... הממשל הוא היה פרו-פלסטיני בצורה קיצונית. לא פחדתי להתעמת שם. לא פחדתי להתעמת עם קלינטון. לא פחדתי להתעמת עם הרוב. בלב הכי את המחיר הבינלאומי אני משלם. אז עדיף לקרוא לקבל תמורה. תמורה לאגרה.
World Trade Center 7 had always been considered the starting point for rebuilding. Located north of the slurry wall, 7 had been cleared faster than the rest of the site, and there had been no bodies to recover. Pelted by debris when the North Tower collapsed, 7 burned until late afternoon, allowing occupants to evacuate to safety.
I remember getting a call from the fire department commander telling me that they were not sure they were going to be able to contain the fire. And I said, you know, we've had such terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
My name is Luke Gadowski. I'm a Brooklyn College student. Now, with all due respect, and I pardon the discretion, but this is a very important question. On a PBS documentary, Rebuilding America, you made an infamous quote saying, "Pull it." Now, you later released a press release saying that was the firefighters outside World Trade Center Building 7 and not 11. It's two questions. If you meant to pull the firefighters out, why didn't you say evacuate the firefighters? And there's also FEMA reports and first responders that I know personally that firefighters were already out that building before you made that statement. So can you please clarify your statement?
That World Trade Center was brought down by a combination of events. The first was the falling antenna from the roof of the North Tower. That antenna came crashing down and sliced through the facade in the front of 7. As it did so, it ruptured fuel lines in the building, which fuel lines were there to serve the emergency generators for the city's, I forget the name of what was the name of the emergency response system. The city here was located at 7 World Trade Center. Nevertheless, that antenna sliced through the fuel lines, caught fire. That fire started to burn and burned intensively. That fire proceeded to burn through the rest of the day. By, I forget what time it was, must have been around 3:30, 4 o'clock, 4:30 in the afternoon. Clearly, that building was on its way down. And I remember receiving a call from which of the members of the fire department saying that this is a terrible problem and they're not going to be able to contain it. We also have been in touch with our people in the building who told us that all the personnel, all the people who worked in the building, all the personnel in that building had been evacuated. And at that point it became obvious that building was on its way down, and by golly, it was unfortunately the last of the buildings to go down on 9/11. Fortunately, it was the first of the buildings to go back after 9/11, and that's where it is today.
Thank you. The speaker in the rear. Thank you, sir. Regarding that quote, sir, the fire department commander at the time of 9/11 was Chief Daniel Nigro, and he recently made a statement in which he denied having that conversation with you about Building 7. And plus, we know from FEMA reports that the firemen were pulled out of the building much earlier in the day due to lack of water supply. So, sir, could you please get it on the record exactly who was it from the fire department that you spoke to about Building 7 on that day? Thank you.
Go on to the next question.
What an answer.
What an answer.
Can we get a response, sir?
Move on to the next question, please.
Okay. 3,000 people died, sir. Can we get an answer, please?
Answer.
Shame on you.
Answer.
You know, excuse me, let me just tell you. Thousands of people's lives were lost on 9/11. There are thousands of pages of testimony as to what transpired. Millions of hours were spent analyzing what caused those Twin Towers to come down and thereafter settle. All of that is public record. We don't have to spend any more time on that.
Then why doesn't the government have explanation? Then why doesn't the government... Wait.
You want to build buildings on it. You're a criminal. You want to build buildings on it. You're a criminal.
Then why doesn't the government have an explanation, sir? If you do, why don't they?
Okay,
Then why doesn't the government have an explanation, sir? If you do, why don't they?
Okay, first responder heard the countdown to blow building 7 from 1 to 10.
Enough.
Okay,
The topic is the future of Lower Manhattan.
Sir, you're disturbing our educational mission here, which is... This is education! You don't want to answer the question, but first responders, they know what happened, and they're coming forward, so...
Yes, thank you for making your points. Our next question, please.
Hi, I'm Judy Jones from Baltimore. Thank you for appearing and taking time out of your busy day to talk with us. This is kind of a female question. Do you see, or when do you see, better female shopping stores in our area?
You're going to get 500,000 square feet of shopping, some of it female shopping.
Time to check in with our Out in the Open panel. Sure they have plenty to say about this. Lauren, Michael DeRoy, welcome back. All right, so let's start with the resident Jew on our panel here. I mean, you hear this stuff, and it just makes you sick to your stomach. There is absolutely no evidence that anybody other than Al-Qaeda was involved with this attack. How upsetting is this to you?
Look, we've been kicked around for 2,000 years. The face you're looking at's got a lot of anger in it because of that. That's not a way to live, wandering around the globe, never having a home. It's pretty difficult because every time there's trouble, we're scapegoated. We're not the only ones that are scapegoated, but we're scapegoated by people who are frightened. They don't care. They are paranoid. You cannot debunk this theory. It is madness as well as idiocy to think that the Jews brought down the World Trade Center on 9/11. But you cannot argue logic to someone who is mentally ill. What frightens me is that the whole nation is frightened, and that fear is being fueled by this administration and by the media, not you, just the opposite. I congratulate you, and I'm grateful for it, seriously, to bring this stuff out, because it is in those times that Jews, like other minorities, better get scared, better get angry, better fight for what's right, and try and convince people courage is the cure for paranoia, not racism.
Is this just a smear campaign for anti-Semites?
I think I agree with Michael. I mean, the blame the Jews theme is something that goes back about 2,000 years. I mean, it's a really hardy varietal. But look, I mean, we know who pulled off 9/11. Richard Minner writes about it in his book, Disinformation. He quotes directly from Osama bin Laden, who says, on a tape we found, we calculated in advance the number of casualties from the enemy who would be killed based on the position of the tower. We had notification since the previous Thursday that the event would take place that day, unquote, says Osama bin Laden himself.
About paranoia.
But what it is, Michael's right.
The FBI's 10 Most Wanted poster reads, quote, Osama bin Laden is wanted in connection with the August 7, 1998 bombings of the United States embassies in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, and Nairobi, Kenya. These attacks killed over 200 people. In addition, bin Laden is a suspect in other terrorist attacks throughout the world. It turns out, though, bin Laden has never been indicted for 9/11. And there's not a single mention of it directly in the FBI poster. Sheila Thorne in the FBI's New Orleans office told us, quote, the indictment could be superseded if necessary. In other words, 9/11 charges could be tacked on later for something many describe as the Pearl Harbor of our generation. As for why there is no mention at all of 9/11 in the FBI's 10 Most Wanted poster of Osama bin Laden, we wanted to get a comment from the White House as well. When we talked to a gentleman by the name of Blair Jones at the White House press office, he told us that we need to go back to justice, in other words, the FBI. We told him we wanted a separate comment, and he said, quote, we speak with one voice.
Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists.
Just 9 days after 9/11, the president addressed a joint session of Congress where he blamed al-Qaeda, even mentioning its leader Osama bin Laden by name. Then came December 13, 2001, when the Pentagon released bin Laden's so-called confession video. The FBI revised bin Laden's poster 2 months after September 11th, and 5 years later, there's still no 9/11 reference. We asked retired Barksdale General Peyton Cole for his reaction.
It's puzzling, and it begs a question of why not.
And we're waiting for that answer, too. Jeffrey, our KSLA News 12 report.
But what it is, Michael's right
for this.
But Michael's right in the sense that we have a government that has led us into a war, and most Americans, even the smartest of us, sit around and go, now why again are we here in the war? And when there are blanks, we often fill in the blanks, and those blanks are filled in by misinformation, urban legends. We create stories, and people believe things.
You're talking about a very unpopular war. We're talking about 9/11.
No, but what I'm talking about is the war is based upon what our government told us, this fear that we have from 9/11.
This will get worse as the unrest in the Middle East gets worse. This problem will not go away. And the reason it won't go away is because we don't have an administration, as we once did, that said and counseled us, we have nothing to fear but fear itself.
Exactly.
We have just the opposite. We have an administration that fuels fear, that puts up the sign every day, that tells us, be frightened, stay scared, be worried, and so we are suspicious, we are xenophobic, and we don't like anybody that's different from us.
How concerned are you that these conspiracy theories will take even deeper hold?
Look, I think it's entirely possible the kind of people who are spreading this sort of stuff will continue to blame the Jews for anything that can go wrong. I think it's very important as this war on terror continues to point out exactly who the bad guys are, which are Islamo-fascists who want you, and me dead, and want people dead around the country, and they're engaged in tremendous violence, killing thousands of people all around the world, starting with, well, even before 9/11, the 93 attack, the attack on the USS Cole. This is a really serious enemy. We need to identify
yes, it is, but there are reasons
educate
why
people as to how
people
evil they
are
are.
open to believe theories. That's my point. There are reasons why people are open to believe theories, and these reasons will not change unless our government more actively works to inform us of what the real truth is, so people are not here playing guessing games.
Lauren Lake, Michael Gross, DeRoy Murdoch. Fascinating discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I can. Your anger was palpable during that piece as well. Well understood. Larry King Live's coming up in just a few minutes. Hey, Larry, you're going to talk to the owners of Barbaro tonight?
Yeah, well, who wouldn't be angry with that last?
No, I know. But, you know, it's astonishing. Paula. Wasn't it the statistic that 1 in 3 Americans believe not that particular conspiracy theory, but one of many?
The old Goebbels theory, you can tell a lie long enough, more people will believe it.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Thank you very much, Ray. I don't think I can compete with that. That was theatrical. Instead, I would like to go a bit beyond the comments that both of my colleagues have made and suggest not only that Israel is no ally, but also that it is actually not a friend, because it does actual damage to the United States through using its considerable access to Congress and the media to promote policies that are good neither for the United States nor for Israel. I'm sure you've all heard the expression that a friend does not let a friend drive drunk. Well, the United States has been driving drunk for quite some time, and that dangerous behavior has to some extent been encouraged by Israel and its many supporters in Washington. Israel might or might not have been an actual enabler of the disastrous American invasion of Iraq, but it is undeniably true that American officials extremely close to the Israeli government were behind the rush to war and the forgery of phony intelligence that fed the process. If the United States goes to war with Iran in the near future, it will not be because Tehran actually threatens America. It will be because Israel and its powerful lobby in the U.S. have succeeded in creating an essentially false casus belli to mandate such action. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who once commented that 9/11 was good for Israel, has repeatedly sought to commit our government to draw red lines that would narrow options for the White House and de facto require it to take action with the military against Iran. Congress is meanwhile advancing legislation that would commit the United States to intervene militarily in support of a unilateral Israeli attack, meaning that Israel could easily be empowered to make the decision on whether or not the U.S. goes to war. Nothing relating to Israel is quite like the U.S. interaction with other countries. Delinda and Janet have outlined the dollar costs and special financing arrangements that go to support Israel, measures that are not in place for any other nation. Congress also approved on Wednesday, as part of the United States-Israel Strategic Partnership Act, by a vote of 410-1, an Israeli exemption from the reciprocity mandated by the so-called visa waiver program. Israelis will be able to travel freely to the United States, while their government will be allowed to refuse entry to American citizens. This is a privilege that is granted to no other country. One congressman has recently even introduced a bill to cut off federal funding for any academic organization that engages in boycotting Israel. Boycotting other countries is okay. Israel interferes in American elections, most recently on behalf of Mitt Romney. It has corrupted our Congress. Its head of government publicly rebukes our own head of state. Government ministers insult and ridicule John Kerry, and its intelligence officers actually provide alarmist and inaccurate private briefings for American senators on Capitol Hill. I also would not doubt that Israel, accustomed to behaving with impunity towards its alleged friend and patron in Washington, might manufacture a pretext to draw the U.S. into a new conflict, something reminiscent of the Lavon affair in Alexandria, Egypt in 1954, or the false flag attack on the USS Liberty in 1967. Israel currently strongly supports using force to intervene in Syria, a proposition that is opposed overwhelmingly by the American public. In short, Israel has no reluctance to use its enormous political and media clout in the U.S. to pressure successive administrations to conform to its own foreign and security policy views. One other very good reason why Israel should not receive billions of dollars in military assistance annually is its persistent espionage against the United States. Grant Smith has described how Friends of Israel stole enriched uranium from a Pennsylvania refinery to create a nuclear arsenal. More recently, we have learned how Arnon Milchan, a Hollywood producer born in Israel, arranged for the illegal purchase of 800 nuclear triggers. Milchan picked up an Oscar last Sunday without any interference from the FBI. The existence of a large-scale Israeli spying effort at the time of 9/11 has been widely reported, incorporating Israeli companies in New Jersey and Florida, as well as hundreds of art students nationwide. 5 Israelis from one of the companies were observed celebrating against the backdrop of the Twin Towers going down. While it is often observed that everyone spies on everyone else, particularly true if one is referring to our own NSA, Espionage is a high-risk business that most countries are extremely careful when they are spying on friends because of fear of blowback. Israel, which relies on Washington for billions of dollars in aid and also for political cover in international fora like the UN, does not spy discreetly, largely because it knows that few in Washington will seek to hold it to account. There were, for example, no consequences for the Israelis when Israeli Mossad intelligence officers using passports and pretending to be Americans recruited terrorists to carry out attacks inside Iran, as noted by Mark Perry this morning. Israelis using U.S. passports in that fashion put every American traveler at risk. Israel, where government and business work hand in hand, has obtained significant advantage by systematically stealing American technology with both military and civilian applications. The U.S.-developed technology is then reverse engineered and used by the Israelis to support their own exports. Sometimes when the technology is military in nature and winds up in the hands of an adversary, the consequences can be serious. Israel has sold advanced weapon systems to China that are believed to incorporate technology developed by American companies, including the Python 3 air-to-air missile and the Delilah cruise missile. There is evidence that Israel has also stolen Patriot missile avionics to incorporate into its own Arrow system, and that it used U.S. technology obtained in its Lavi fighter development program, which was funded by U.S. taxpayers, to help the Chinese develop their own J-10. The reality of Israeli spying is indisputable. I might cite the names of Jonathan Pollard, Ben Ami Kaddish, Stuart Nozet, and Larry Franklin as spies for Israel have been caught, but they are only the tip of the iceberg. Israel always features prominently in the annual FBI report called Foreign Economic Collection and Economic and Industrial Collection. The 2005 report states, Israel has an active program to gather proprietary information within the United States. These collection activities are primarily directed at obtaining information on military systems and advanced computing applications that can be used in Israel's sizable armaments industry. It adds that Israel recruits spies, uses electronic methods, and carries out computer intrusion to gain the information. A 1996 Defense Investigative Service report noted that Israel has great success stealing technology by exploiting the numerous co-production projects that it has with the Pentagon. It says, placing Israeli nationals in key industries is a technique utilized with great success. A General Accounting Office examination of espionage directed against American defense and security industries described how Israeli citizens residing in the U.S. had stolen sensitive technology to manufacture artillery gun tubes, obtained classified plans for reconnaissance systems, and passed sensitive aerospace designs to unauthorized users. The GAO concluded that Israel conducts, and this is a quote, conducts the most aggressive espionage operation against the United States of any U.S. ally. In June 2006, a Pentagon administrative judge overruled an appeal by an Israeli who had been denied a security clearance. If you can imagine that, an Israeli with a security clearance at the Pentagon. But anyway, they overruled him when he appealed it, and said the Israeli government is actively engaged in military and industrial espionage in the United States. An Israeli citizen working in the U.S. who has access to proprietary information is likely to be a target of such espionage. More recently, FBI counterintelligence officer John Cole has reported how many cases of Israeli espionage are dropped under orders from the Justice Department. He provides a conservative estimate of 125 viable investigations into Israeli espionage involving both American citizens and Israelis that were stopped due to political pressure. So the answer to the question, is Israel an ally of the United States, is most definitely no. Is it even a friend? Well, I suppose there are all kinds of friends in the world, but if you judge Israel by its record on how it interacts with the American government and people, I think the answer would also have to be no. Thank you.